Hello, John Haverkamp here. I wanted to record this supplemental because we had some technical difficulties last weekend when we were recording for the live class. Luckily I have found my save file, so we're ready to go with detailing pass on a UVW unwrapped set of wings here. So this is just a first pass that I did. So let me hide that one and switch to the low poly version, and you can see the poly groups that I used to unwrap it. And I'm going to divide this several times. It's 24,000 polys right now, and I'm going to go ahead and take it up to 1.5 million. And it looks good. So of course, as before, we first want to store morph target, and this looks like I have one previously here, so I'm going to delete that. But normally when you're starting, you shouldn't have a morph target, so you store morph target. And I'm going to open up my layers, and it looks like I have one layer right here, so I'm going to delete that one. So still good. And then normally you would come in, there wouldn't be any layers, but that must have been left over. So I'm going to make one layer, and that's going to sort of be like my base layer. And let's have some good practice here and rename that. So we'll call this the base. And this is just sort of something that I can come back to if things go wrong. And I'm going to make another layer, and this is going to be first detail pass. Let's call this detail number 1. Okay. So it's in record mode, and I can start to think about what sort of alphas I might want to lie down, or what sort of sculpting I might want to do. So I think I'm going to start with a damn standard here and just cut some lines in. And that one seemed a little too deep, so I'm going to turn down the Z intensity. And I'm just sort of, without thinking too much, going to knock in some striations into the wings. And I would really like to hit these edges a little bit and sort of break those lines up. Whoop. And you just got to kind of fall into a rhythm with this. And this, of course, is on a layer, so I'll be able to turn it up or down as might be necessary. And of course use my morph brush to get rid of things if I don't like what I did. But I just want to get at least one pass of this together. Now you might have noticed something right there. Let me switch to another material so maybe you can see this better. I've got some kind of chatter along there, and one way to correct that is to adjust the roll distance. Apparently I was moving my and this is normally in the stroke palette. I was probably using moving my stylus a little too fast. So under modifiers you have a roll, enable, and a roll distance, and I've just got that roll distance turned on down here. And actually I don't want to enable that roll, I just want to keep that roll distance. So I think that keeps things much nicer than it was, even though I'm still moving fairly rapidly. And I'm going to turn that down a little bit more. See, it's making deeper gouges now that I've upped that roll distance. This is sort of meant to be webbing, or wing webbing texture, and so I want to stay away with, like, say, trying to very crisply define the bone separations from the membrane. I don't really want to do that with this pass, if at all, because you're going to see in a second when we start laying some noise alphas down. this is kind of like a base coat that I'm trying to establish that's all sculpted information, so that when I start using alphas and noise, that it doesn't become all alphas and noise. And here, since I'm working on the other side and this is a fairly thin membrane, I'm going to go ahead and turn on backface masking so that I don't accidentally start to influence the other side too much, because what it'll do is it'll poke out the other side. So if I have that backface masking off and I got a fairly large brush with a fairly high intensity, you know, of course it's doing the opposite on the other side, and I don't want that. That doesn't make sense. So work some of this. And I think after I do this, I might divide one more time, because I don't feel like I have quite enough resolution for this detail pass right here. So that'll probably take things up to maybe 6 million, and hopefully the computer will be able to cope. But I think it's okay to lay this down on this level. And you know what I'm starting to realize is that, let me check this, make sure I'm telling you the truth here. I think if I try to divide this with layer record on, weird things might happen. Yeah. Mesh geometry cannot be modified while the layer is in recording mode. So I kind of messed up there. So I might have to bake this layer in before I divide and then go on and establish some other layers. So if you want to do it right and you want to keep all your layers, you probably need to get to your max subdivision before you start storing morph targets and creating layers, if that makes sense. So, and maybe you can see here that some of that information on the others that came from the other side is starting to show here a little bit on this side, but I think that's going to be okay. Occasionally I accidentally click in the background and spin. Yeah, I just did it again. So I really want to make sure that I'm on the model when I start my stroke. It's kind of natural for me to want to flow back in the opposite direction, but you really can't get away with that. It's just how Zbrush works. And I'm being really loose with this. I'm trying to get an organic feel. I'm trying to vary the length and intensity of my strokes. I'm definitely not doing something like that. That's just going to be too regular, and that's not where I'm headed with this. So you gotta kind of loosen up your wrist and kind of turn your mind off and just try to sort of let things happen here. And it's okay to maybe put some slight curve into what you're doing, and it's okay to cross over. And if you start to get effects that you don't like, you know, of course you can back out, or you can just hit a smooth. And right at the end of the class, the other weekend, I showed you a way to modify the smooth brush. You got this. I'm holding down Shift here on my brush menu, and we've got a brush modifier here, and I can turn this up or down and it will smooth. If it's up, say to 100% here, when I smooth, it will smooth high areas and leave the low areas. And if it's on the negative, it will smooth, it will ignore the low areas in the smoothing process. See, that can kind of help to bring out what I've got going on here. And I believe I've been doing this with symmetry on, so maybe that wasn't the best idea for this pass, but this is kind of a dry run, I guess. Probably I should have done it as, and I'm going to take that brush modifier back up and hit that. So this is kind of going to be a dry run, and then I'm going to bake the layer and subdivide, delete my morph target, and store another morph target. So let's do that now. So I'll go under my layers, and when you're done with layers, you can hit bake all. And you know what? I have really found that if you're working with poly paint, which I'm not yet, but if you bake while you're in record mode, Zbrush can kill your poly paint information. And so I've gotten in the habit to go ahead and turn the record off before I do a bake all and get rid of the layers. Well, not get rid of the layers, but you know, accept them. So I think that's a good way to go. Let's change that morph target. So I'm going to have this be my new base, basically. So I'm going to delete the morph target. I'm going to store the morph target. Actually, let me divide first in case anything gets weird about that. So let's divide up to 6.2, and hey, Zbrush is still working. And find my morph target. Let's store morph target, and I'll create 2 new layers. Let's call this first one base again, and we'll create another one, and this is going to be my real detail one. Okay, so let's think what I want to do here. Do I want to turn off symmetry? Yeah, let's turn off symmetry for a little while, and let's put some different stuff in here. Lower the draw size. And since I've got this on a working layer, I can maybe be a little heavy-handed with this. I can maybe whack this a little heavier than I might want to keep, because I can always turn down the layer, right? You guys see where I'm headed with this. Pretty much more of the same, but since I've got that first pass down, I don't have to worry about maybe covering it so much. These can kind of be the unique things that when we look at the wings, it'll be different from side to side. Let's do some more over here too. And I'm maybe working quicker in the interest of time than I maybe should be. But you can see that the marks that I made on that lower subdivision pass have kind of smoothed out when I subdivide it. And so that's why it's okay to work at a lower level, maybe for your first guys. So make some more marks in there. Let's take a look at it as a whole. I think that's starting to break up, them looking too symmetrical. Give some raggedy areas, different places. Okay, so I feel pretty good about that layer. Let's go ahead and turn off the record mode. And just waiting for Zbrush to sort itself out here. And now I can play with maybe turning that pass down so it's not quite so intense. And I could try putting it into the negative and seeing if I like that. Do I like that? So this creates what I just did and turns it into raised areas. And you know what? I think in conjunction with that first pass I did that was layers that went in, I think I kind of like that. But I think I want to break it up a little bit, so I'm going to go back into record mode. And this is Zbrush thinking about 6 million polys right now. So bear with me. I really try not to click and get impatient when it's thinking, because that's what results in a crash. Okay, so I'm back to record mode here, and I'm going to open up my morph brush since I stored that morph target. So just hit M on the keyboard to help me find the morph, and there it is. And I'm going to actually turn this on spray, and I'm going to use kind of one of these mottled alphas. I don't need RGB. And I'm just breaking those guys up. And it's subtle, but this morph spray I think is going to take away the crispness that I was getting with those lines in a really nice way. Let me zoom in close to an area so you guys can see what I'm talking about. Say these areas right here, and I'm just hitting that with that morph, and it's breaking up the sort of uniformity that was going on there, and I quite like that. It's kind of giving it almost like an orange peel type of feeling around those lines. And I quite like that. And I got to remind myself that I don't have symmetry on, so I got to treat the other side the same way. There we go. So wherever those areas were a little too gouged in, I'm just going to break it up. And I think I feel good about that. So let's turn the record off again, and I could play with that. Do I like that coming out, or do I want it to be in like it originally was? Let me see. Really feels scale's okay either way, so just for variation I'm going to pop it out. Put that on like -0.7 and kind of go with it. It's okay. So time for a new layer. And let's be disciplined about this and call this noise 1. Because what I wanted to show you guys was surface noise. And so I'm going to click on noise. And I've already got an alpha loaded in here because it stored the one I had used earlier, but I don't want to use that one right off the bat. Maybe a little too regular. So to switch the alpha, I'm going to click there and turn it off for a second, and then I'm going to click on that again, and it goes into a load dialog. I just need to find my dragon alphas, and I made this alpha wing pattern 1 here. And what this one is just the tileable texture that I made in Photoshop real quick. And I'll probably put up into Photoshop and show you how I did it after we start getting some results with it. And by default, Noisemaker will be in 3D application of the alpha. And if you got a tiled alpha, that can be plenty. That can work. But if you really want things to align to your UVs, you click UVs. And of course that makes it repeat a lot more, but I can play with the scale here, and obviously the strength is turned up way too much. So I'm going to turn the strength down and the scale up. And I think I'm going to put that scale into such a way where these are actually going to be depressions instead of raised areas. And we'll see. I can do a couple passes with this at different scales. So maybe we'll try a really big, fairly broad one right off the bat. About something like that. So I'm going to say OK. And since I'm on a layer, let's turn the strength up a little bit, just so we get a nice bite. And you can see that's already given me some interesting results. But this is not applied to the mesh. This is just noise. If I turn off noise, it's gone. So I actually have to hit this apply to mesh thing, in which case it'll write it to the layer. And it's thinking about it. So one of the dangers of working at 6 million is that you gotta wait sometimes. And it is just about there. Bingo. So I can open up my layers, and I can see, do I want to keep that, or how much of it do I want to morph away? And you can see I'm getting some artifacting there from my UV, so I think I definitely want to morph that out. So let's start with that, and I got that same brush on there with the spray for the morph, which is sort of giving me this fringe benefit of having some extra tooth on it. And I think I want to keep these squiggles more or less confined to the membranes. And so I think I'm going to do this pass with the morph in such a way that I almost completely erase it from the digits, the bones here. have symmetry on. It's okay to leave a little bit of that, I think, but I don't think I want that to be such a recognizable pattern on the non-membrane areas. And I don't have backface masking on, so it is sort of taking care of the other side. And I think that's okay for this particular pass with the morpher. So I'm getting some cool stuff there. Okay. So one of the cool things about this noise, because it was UV distributed, even though it's a repeating pattern, it's not uniform from one side to the other. So I can actually turn my symmetry back on and do some more sort of feathering with this morph tool. I think I'm going to turn the spray off, go back to freehand, and kind of paint down the intensity of some of these areas, just to break it up and have it not be so uniform. So even though I'm morphing with symmetry on, because what I'm morphing is already non-symmetrical, I think things are going to be fine with that. So I just want to look at the overall pattern. Let me try a material maybe with a bit more cavity masking. Let me load one up here. I got a custom guy with a lot of cavity mask I made. So we can see what's going on here with these depressed areas. And so maybe I do want to put on backface masking at this point. I want to get rid of maybe a lot of this on the back side. I want the veininess or the gouges that are implied on one side not to be quite so serious, but only on the upper side. So that shouldn't be affecting this side whatsoever. And I'm not getting rid of all of this. I'm leaving it. And I've got an alpha, and I'm just kind of dabbing at it almost like with a sponge, and that's breaking up what the noise did for me. So it's very much an integration of handwork and the automation effects that you can get. And I'm going to do a little bit on this side too. Maybe let's try this alpha. Okay, let's see what that's doing for us. Yeah, look at that. Subtle, but cool. Getting a nice leather effect there. I think you can see it in the shininess of that specular right there, that this is really creating some cool effects. And this is the morph brush still. I'm morphing back down, but only in the areas where that alpha is intense. Once again, I still got the symmetry on, but since I'm morphing, I'm doing this in places that I've already been sculpted differently. I don't think it's going to be so noticeable. And yeah, I think some cool things are happening in here. I'm changing the directionality of this, almost like cross-hatching, which I think is going to give it a nice leathery look, but for the most part I'm following the directionality of the limbs of these wings. And this is actually because of my UV seam. So temporarily I'm going to turn that alpha off and go down pretty small and make sure that I paint those areas out. And that is sort of a drawback using the UV in the noise. But I think we can live with it because it's an easy fix. But I don't want to leave any of those mechanical telltales in there. Let's see if they're on the side. Yeah, not so much. So I'm going to go back. This is alpha 58. And I'm going to go back to what I was doing earlier. A little bit bigger draw size. Some more cross-hatching. Let's get a nice pass of this. I could probably even turn this up a little bit. Once again, since I'm on a layer, why not hit it a little bit heavier than you might normally try, because you can always turn it down. And so I think you guys see where I'm headed with this. So let me pop into Photoshop real quick and show you how I made that sort of squiggly alpha tileable, and just show you how quick it was to go about that. This is what I ended up with. And of course, if I do a filter, other, offset, this is 1024 right now. And Photoshop's screaming along here. Okay, filter, other, offset, and that's exactly half of 1024, 512, and you can see that it's completely tileable. So let's try to do a very similar thing from scratch real quick. So I'm going to create a 1024 by 1024, and let's go ahead and make it, I don't think background color will work, we'll just make it white. And we'll use my fill tool, and let's create a layer. Where did my layers go? Here they are. So brand new layer. Let's get on a fairly small brush and switch to white, and I'll just do some marks, and kind of thinking like veins or stems on a leaf. And I could make maybe some bigger ones. Kind of thinking of rivers and their tributaries. The smaller ones going into the bigger ones. And okay, that's enough. So I'm going to do filter, other, offset, and set that off exactly half. So now my very clear border lines are now in the center of my thing, and so what I can do is I can just connect them. I can connect my lines. So that all distinction between these guys is kind of obliterated. And I'm not being precious about this at all, as you can hopefully see. And let's maybe turn this down even lower and just get some kind of dot 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 information that's not connected in between. I'm going to try this. This will kind of maybe give it a skin type feeling. And I'm painting too fast, so I got to slow down. This is a good technique to do skin pores for humans too. You kind of make alternating thick and thin lines. And I'm just going to see where this takes me. And I'm going to blur this a lot before I accept it too. Maybe with a filter and maybe just with the blur brush. And of course I'm going to offset it another couple of times to make sure that I'm blending good and that it is really 100% tileable. And I just don't want there to be any glaring areas that are left untended to. Now let's switch to a blur brush, and maybe with a messy alpha on the blur brush. Maybe not. Just not strong enough and I want to go quick. So I'm just kind of blurring those main areas, which as this gets translated to an alpha will mean that they're going to be a much more rounded raised area rather than a sharp raised area. And we'll make things not quite so perfect too, which can be good. So you just kind of got a cell structure here, and maybe I will go ahead and do an actual Gaussian blur over top of this. Now that's a little too much, so maybe somewhere there. Let's actually duplicate this layer. So now I got two of them, and the first one I'll really blur. Blur that like crazy, and then I'll turn that other layer on over top of it and maybe turn it down a little bit and blur that one, but not so much. So that one will get a little bit of blur, but not as much as the other one. Yeah, maybe I can get that going. Okay, I'm going to merge those two layers because the filter other offset only happens to one layer. So other offset, and you can see this is the second offset, and I still do have some telltale lines in my my tiling here. But I think I ought to be able to just blur those right out, and those should go away and not be noticeable. And maybe I need to connect that line right there. Connect that, connect that. And let's just finish this off by blurring what I just did. want to stay away, since I want this to be my final offset pass, I want to try to stay away from the super edges, because that's where you create another break in the tileability. Looks like I'm going to have to do it one more time. Filter other offset, and let's see if I could spot any tile tails in the center here again. Not really. I think it looks pretty good. So now I got a whole nother pattern to try out on my wings and see what it does for me. So I'm just going to save this. And what shall we call this one? Wing pattern 2 maybe. Whoops. There we go. So back into Zbrush. And let's save these wings in case I have a disaster, huh? And I'm going to make a new layer. And I'm going to call this one Noise 2. And I'm going to go into my surface, turn the noise on, and of course it's loading up that exact same pattern as before, so I'll go into the edit, I'll turn that alpha off temporarily, and I will load up the new one that I just made, wing pattern 2, and you can see that that's given me some interesting things. But I want this to be finer detail, so I'm going to turn that scale down so we can get some about right in there. I like that. And I'm going to turn up the strength even more, because remember this is on its own layer, and so look what I got going on there. Now this is way too regular, maybe, and repeating, but of course I've got the morph and I can knock it back down. So my morph is still loaded, my morph target is still valid, my layer is recording, and I think I might try this on spray just to see. And let me turn that back up. So this alpha is maybe not strong enough. I'm not really seeing the results I want. So I'm going to try one of these stippled ones. Let's see what I can get. Am I on the right layer? Yeah. Well, let's try it with one more like this sponge. It's not really doing anything. Let me try. Huh. I wonder if my morph target got messed up. Oh! My bad. I finally realized what I did. It's not deleting that noise that I put down because I never applied that surface information to the mesh. So let me turn that off and see what I actually did. I erased far too much, so I got to back up. I got to keep backing up. I think I'm going to try to do it by the timeline here. That was too far. That's before I did noise noise 2. Okay, there's noise 2 when I first did it. And let's turn that on again. And of course I gotta reapply what I did. Whoops, it's this one. And I'm going to turn that scale down even more. I think that was about where I had it. Maybe a little bit more. And a little bit more strength. I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so now I need to remember to apply this to the mesh. And that'll take a second to pop in there. I was wondering why my morph target wasn't working, and that's why. So it's a pretty common mistake. So I got this on its own layer. My morph is now valid. I'm going to go back to that spray, go back to that alpha 58 to see how that's doing, and yeah, I'm breaking that up now. And just to be interested in what might happen, let me try this sort of speckled alpha and see what happens. I kind of like that, yeah. So that's going to break up, even though it's a tileable pattern. It does have some regularity to it. You can't see the joints of the tile, but you see how it repeats this kind of circle over and over again in it, and this morphing will break that up. I'm actually going to turn off symmetry real quick and knock those. Somebody really wants to talk to me, but I'm not gonna. Break that up, and I got backface masking on, so I'm going to need to do it on the other side too. And as long as I get some different information there and kind of lead the eye away from seeing that as symmetry, I think we're really in business with this. This has been, whoops, there we go. I think this has been a profitable look. Okay, now I'm going to turn off the spray and turn off the alpha, and I'm going to use the morph once again to paint out. I'll turn the Z intensity. I'm not going to do 100%, but I'm going to moderate that skin texture on my non-membrane areas. And that'll give me the ability to maybe put some other alphas in there and have some variation going on with this. So anyway, it's more or less what I wanted to show you detail pass wise. We could take this further, but I think I'll save that for another installment. Maybe get in some poly painting and some materials on this particular one so you can see something taken to completion. But I hope you've enjoyed this. A little bit of technical difficulties, but not as bad as the other day. So y'all take care, and I'll be seeing you. Thank you. Bye.